اليوم هو ثالث أيامنا في هذا المنتدى الإبداعي، حيث ناقشنا مواضيع متعددة وحلقات نقاش ومحاضرات كانت تدور حول الارتباط ما بين الفن والهوية. اليوم أعتقد أنه سيكون ختام بمسك حقيقة، حيث سنتنقل ما بين يعني 5 فقرات مميزة مع ضيوف رائعين. في البداية أول فقرة ستكون عن موضوع يهمنا جميعا أو شعرنا به كثيرا في السنتين الماضيتين، ارتباطنا بمساحاتنا الشخصية، ارتباط المساحة التي نعيش بها بنفسيتنا وشعورنا النفسي بداخلها. يعني أعتقد أن احنا جميعا كان لدينا تجربة أو انتباهة كبيرة لبيوتنا في أيام الحجر، في فترة الجائحة، كيف أصبحنا ننتبه حتى لطبيعة المعمار الذي نسكن فيه. فهذه الانتباهة قد تكون مهمة، ولكنها دائما تستمر معنا في علاقة شعورنا النفسي بهذه المساحات. معنا في هذه الفقرة الأستاذ رأفت مجذوب، الاستراتيجي الثقافي، وسيكون معنا عبر الفضاء الافتراضي. فليتفضل. قبل أن يبدأ.
Can you hear me? You're on mute, by the way.
أود أن أنبه.
Hello? Okay, I can hear you now.
Yes, do you hear me, Mr. Rafat?
Yeah, hello, I can hear you, but I couldn't hear the intro. This is what I was trying to say.
طيب تفضل. قبل أن تبدأ بس أريد أن أذكر أنه يوجد ترجمة من العربية للإنجليزية وترجمة من الإنجليزية للعربية. There is a translation from Arabic to English and from English to Arabic. You can use your headphones and chairs. طيب أستاذ رأفت تفضل، المساحة لك.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. So, hello everyone. I hope you're all doing okay. Thank you, Silverline, for the invitation, and thanks, Misk, for having me. I'd also like to begin by thanking my team at the Khan, who's been integral at making the experiments I'm going to show you today possible. Thank you, Tara, Nicole, Julia, and Salim. Fingers crossed the internet will be kind to us. So I'm Rafat. I spend most of my time thinking about the future, mainly how we can make it instead of wait for it, and mostly with people in the region. The Arab future is something that has been very exciting for me since I was a kid. I was raised in a home that cared about being Arab, and as in the case in many households in Tripoli, where I'm from, that's the case. I was and still am enchanted with fiction. Science fiction, social fiction, folk tales, musical narrative, you name it. I became an architect because of fiction. I refused and still refuse to see things as they are. A room is much more than just a room. The task of building where we live is a beautiful, delicate process of speculation and world-making that is at the core of creating the future. So when I was invited to speak about 2 bedrooms, a living room, and a parking as a theme for today's talk, I decided to share some of my work in relation to the notion of dwelling, future-making, and cultural practice. As I will try to illustrate, these processes precede and succeed the act of building. They include architecture within a conversation of social narrative with people at its core, people's histories, their dreams and desires. And because we get our news and wisdom from Instagram these days, I'm starting off with an Instagram post. It's a quote by Virgil Abloh that is very relevant to the trajectory I'm about to tell you about. Young architects can change the world by not building buildings. So by education and training, I'm an architect. I started off my career designing 2 bedrooms, a living room and parking, 3 bedrooms, a living room and a parking, until I maxed out. I was feeling a tension between the houses that were being designed and built and what I thought I would be doing as an architect. There was so much compromise in what the market does to design and life that I wasn't ready for. Fast forward a few years, I took a break from building. I had worked on rather typical residential spaces with a genuine excitement about dwelling, but inability to explore and experiment within brackets of being a professional architect with clients that want to build to make profit for their clients that need a good deal. I took a break from building and started writing. Everything that I couldn't do as a practicing architect, I did in the perfume garden. I was writing an autobiography of another Arab world. There were no borders. We were free. We did not kill the planet. We enjoyed our heritage, and we built our future. So this shift to writing did not lessen my desire to participate in building the Arab future I was telling you about. On the contrary, writing became an exciting new tool to build. Writing as a tool for architecture allows us to prioritize workshopping of narrative and identity into the process of implementing the built environment. It allows us to spend time imagining social relations, interpret our heritage, construct new community frameworks, test them, make mistakes, be bold and innovate. I was writing, but the architect inside of me knew that what starts on paper can actually materialize in public. When I speak of writing and publishing, I'm talking about making public. Whether it's printing words on paper or making a building, it's all an act of publication. So the question becomes, how can we turn these fictions into reality? Fiction can be turned into reality by creating proper frameworks to make them accessible. Book fictions become realities by being printed and circulated in the publishing industry. Scripts become reality by being filmed and circulated in the film industry. What I'm aiming to publish are new cultural practices I'm writing about in the perfume garden that respond to how people live and interact in the region. An example of a cultural practice would be children building their homes as extensions to family homes, for example. It could be buying vegetables from a farmer's market every end of week. So to experiment with new cultural practices, I founded the Khan, which is the Arab Association for Prototyping Cultural Practices. I used it as a platform to test social interactions, understand cultural feedback loops, and speculate fictions and futures that are close to home. The name of the Khan is inspired by Khans in Tripoli, my hometown, where I'm speaking to you from today. Khans are temporary domestic spaces, or historic motels, let's say, that facilitated commerce along trade routes in the Islamic world. They are hybrid spaces of commercial exchange that allow for short stays. In the pictures, you can see the Khan of Tailors and the Khan of Soap in Tripoli. The historic reference is not a prompt to welcome nostalgia in my work. On the contrary, it is a gesture of cultural continuity that I feel is very intimate and personal and requires a mediation between inside and outside, private and public, past and future. The living space is a space of cultural formation, where people share knowledge and sentiment. It is a platform for identity formation, making it crucial as a site of prototyping cultural practices, refocusing the conversation of lived spaces beyond building. So here's a typical two-bedroom apartment in Beirut. Ideally, a real estate agent would show you this apartment with rooms labeled and explaining how you could use it to the maximum. Perhaps even how to close off the terrace and use it as an extra room for free. The market as is making people live in scarcity and enabling them in like an inhuman process that is disconnected from personal comfort, from the world, and from potential public impact. In this conversation today, I'd like to complicate that and question the two-bedroom narrative in hopes of imagining beyond scarcity. So can we live in spaces that are not labeled? Where's the line between private and public? Can our utensils impact the economy? How does the design of cooking space affect what we eat? How does our heritage impact how we host? Does having original artworks at home have any behavioral value? Can our furniture impact our identity? Does our living space tell our story? And most importantly, can it change it? From these questions, we can assume that identity is essentially a design question. We can trace it back and forth, look at how our histories have shaped us, our spaces and objects, and how our present dreams and worries enable us to understand the shape of our futures. In this conversation, I would like us to think together of how to be more aware of identity as a design practice and work towards influencing this process towards more fertile and generative futures. The first project I'll be sharing is called the Khan Spaces. It is a series of temporary residential spaces that materialize and embody narratives from the perfumed garden. I consider these works as moments to experience fiction in real time and change both fiction and reality. The Khan Spaces acknowledge the identity production that happens within living spaces and design for that process. We'll be looking at 3 of those spaces, one in Boston, the second in Brussels, and the third in Beirut. Wherever the spaces are located, they tell alternative stories of the Arab world, act as portals to it, and invite ways of practicing it. The Boston Khan Space was set up in my studio space at MIT. It was the first experiment in working with planting a residential space in a non-residential setting. The shape transformed using elements created using the narrative of the perfumed garden and revolting against what can be considered as living standards. 4 wall-mounted clocks tell time in different Arab countries, in Lebanon and Palestine, for example, 2 places that are inaccessible to each other while being in one time zone. They remind of the Palestinian occupation as an Arab identity conversation. The bed in the background is designed as the shape of the base of the Mediterranean Sea, materializing Israel-Lebanon and the border gash dispute between these 2 countries. The wallpaper is a stylized manuscript of the perfumed garden. The globe on the floor highlights a unified Arab world. And images framed show exhibits of Arab modernity, such as this picture by the beach house by Rifat Shadaji in Lebanon. The second is the Khan in Brussels. The Khan in Brussels was located in Galerie Ravenstein, a busy public space connected to the city's central station. At its core, this project introduced people oblivious to nuances of Arab identity with new fiction that the Khan is trying to make real, using building blocks of our regional heritage. The space featured a replica of the lobby of the Baron Hotel in Aleppo and a calligraphy of al-Haq, which means truth in Arabic. Al-Haq is a word we use a lot at the Khan to speak about the possibility of multiple truths and the identities we're building. It's a reminder of the fact that in this new Arab world landscape and this new Arab landscape, opposing fictions can exist. Inside, the wallpaper element is also used, carrying narratives from one Khan space to another. The piano has a verse of On This Earth, a poem by Mahmoud Darwish, that is placed to propose another way to play the instrument. In Beirut, the Khan spaces take another turn. And instead of building a residential pavilion, we decided to inhabit a typical 2-bedroom apartment and explore it as a cultural incubator. These are a few images from the main space. As in all the Khan spaces, the objects are loaded with meaning. The focus here was to source objects and materials from the neighborhood and create a flexible space for work and experimentation. Here are a few pictures of the outdoor spaces at the Khan. Both indoor and outdoor were employed as spaces of living and working. It was used by artists, makers, thinkers to work and share their work in a personal setting. The Khan space in Beirut developed as a prototype for a cultural space that is not public, but acts as an incubator for thinking about the public from a very personal perspective. It made us think further into what constitutes the residential and how can it be fueled to be more and to do more. What do people want to have in their living spaces? What do we know about public taste? How can we productively tap into living spaces to understand the city more and create a butterfly effect for public impact? The Khan collection is the second project I want to use to illustrate the entanglement of public and private and identity as a design project. We invited 3 young artists to create 3 artworks for unlikely art patrons, people that are outside of the art economy. It highlights the link and identity expression between the outside and inside of the home. 3 patrons in Tripoli were at the center of this project, and they were chosen based on different questions on dwelling that we were dealing with. I'd like to briefly tell you Ali, Nabil, and Rashad. Ali is a waiter at Silver Shore Restaurant in Tripoli, one of the most famous restaurants in the city. He works in the restaurant, but also caters at homes for weddings and funerals. So his experience of homes is vast and deep. When asking him about his home, he didn't want to receive an artwork at first because he couldn't understand why anyone would own one. But then he opened up about what he cared about, his family, nature, horses, and gardening. This GIF is part of a video where he's explaining how he relates more to a Quranic verse than a painting, for example, and how he prefers having things at home that he understands. And these are a series of trials that Nicole, the artist working on Ali's piece, developed in continuous conversation with him. Ali's work is still in progress and eventually will be in his house. Nabil is our second patron. He owns a CD shop in Tripoli and has inherited the lease of some of the city's old cinemas from his father. When we met with him, he was specific about the type of art he likes, mainly realistic paintings and cinema posters. So Tala, the artist working on this piece, created a cinema poster for him and his father as movie stars. He was present during the process and guided the work, imagining where he would hang it at home and in his shop. Rashad, our third patron, is a bus driver on the Beirut-Tripoli highway. And spending so much time on the road, his perception of living space is the road. He lives in his workspace and reflects on Tripoli's old center and main transport hub as the collapse of past, present, and future. So for his work, Julia created several scenes of his favorite elements of the city to be placed in his home. These works essentially show how the living spaces of dwellers in the same city can be connected. They highlight the process of making their identities public and shared through artworks in their homes. You can get more in depth into the conversations, references, and artworks, if you like, by scanning this code. The question grows, how do we use the home to evolve cultural identity? We invest further and start mapping more links between the private and the public through daily rituals and practices. So for the third chunk of this conversation, we consider craftspeople as a link between in and out, and the bridge between heritage, cultural identity, and the future. We've been mapping products and works of craftspeople in Tripoli, Ramallah, and Jerusalem to uncover the cycle between desire, making, and living in the region. Crafts are integral in thinking of living as a philosophy beyond consumption metrics. So in designing the future Arab home, we need to write or maybe rewrite the interplay between private and public. Crafts connect us to a lineage of traditional technologies, with practicing makers having been in the business for decades non-stop. It's drenched in identity because crafts are usually passed on through the intimate process of family business, a lot based in homes, other in small shops, and encapsulate individual and collective histories of the formations of our cities. But there's a crisis there. Like the problematics faced with the 2-bedroom standard model, craftspeople are not interested in passing on their crafts. The threat of personal space is mirrored in public. It's a cycle that is connected, and work on it must be done in both directions. Most craftspeople credit the reason to that is that their trades are unsustainable. This is due to many reasons, mainly that what they make no longer fits what people desire. So back to the drawing board, exploring prototyping cultural practices and turning fictions into reality. Can craftspeople be part of this futurist question of designing identity? Can they be part of that equation? So we explore that through collaborations we did in Palestine and Lebanon. In this picture, we attempt to make a lemon squeezer with a carpenter in Ramallah using some leftover wood. Here, we're looking at a pepper grinder in Ramallah and a phone holder also in Ramallah being used to develop new products. We also approached home businesses and helped rebrand their food products for a younger, more modern appeal. And we engaged with tailors, experimenting with some minimal embroideries with modern products to test in the market. Here we have Relax, a typography we're developing with a few tailors in Tripoli. The final phase is to completely bridge the circuit of homemaking between private and public, inviting dwellers and makers to acquire their cities as spaces of communal living, learning, and growing. We start craftspeople to craftspeople of different disciplines to collaborate and build public platforms for learning. The first was in Tripoli, where we built a small stadium out of upcycled material. You can watch the full video by scanning this code. Titled Everything in Your Love Becomes Easy, this video shows the very personal process of making that I'm particularly talking about in this talk today. These are a few possible applications of the Tripoli Street School in different sites. And this is the street school in Abu Dhabi, made in collaboration with a few Emirati women that are skilled with traditional crafts of weaving palm leaves. And finally, the street school in Amman brings together workers at the MMAG Foundation to recycle old artworks that are left over by different artists and build public schools and commercial space. So throughout all of these examples, prototyping cultural practices comes forth as the framework of writing as architecture. And to build this new Arab future and to ensure the formation and evolution of our identity, it is important to view the city and the community as an integral part of the living space. Contrary to popular belief that architecture is an art of borders, the home, the street, who lives in it, and who builds it are not separate. From the perspective of narrative and identity, they are not only complementary, they are one. Thank you very much for listening.
أستاذ رأفت.
Thank you.
طيب قبل أن ننتقل إلى الأسئلة بودنا أن نتشارك معكم استفتاء وإذا ممكن أنكم تشاركونا من خلال الكيو آر كود. في عندنا استفتاءين، إذا ممكن نحطون السؤال الأول. طيب السؤال هو: إلى أي مدى منزلك هو انعكاس لشخصيتك وهويتك؟ من 1 إلى 10. 10 معناها أنه في تطابق كامل بين بيتك وبين شخصيتك. 1 معناها أنه ما في أي علاقة. في حلول في المنتصف يعني كثيرة. طيب ننتقل إلى الثاني. يبدو أن الناس ما بين 5 و8. طيب اذكر العناصر الموجودة في مساحتك الخاصة التي تقول هذه أنا أو هذا أنا، يعني بمعنى أضيفوا الكلمات اللي أنتم تشوفون أن هذه تمثلكم داخل مساحاتكم. هنا المقصود بالمساحة البيت أو المكان الذي تعيش فيه. طيب يعني ماي كمبيوتر كولر، روح المكان، إجابات متنوعة. شكرا لكم على يعني مشاركتنا هذا الاستفتاء. وأستاذ رأفت رأيت الاستفتاءات الجمهور الآن، إذا تسمح سنأخذ بعض الأسئلة لكي تجيب عليها. لدينا 5 دقائق للأسئلة. إذا في أحد عنده سؤال أستاذ رأفت. أي سؤال؟ طيب أستاذ رأفت، إذا في إضافة.
أنا ما شفت الريزلتس تبع البول، so if there's anything interesting to talk about we can.
الريزلتس كانت مثلا في السؤال الأول إلى أي درجة مكانك يشبهك، كان الناس ما بين 5 إلى 8 من 10.
أوكي.
بالنسبة للسؤال الآخر اللي كان الاستفتاء المرتبط إيش أكثر شيء يمثلك داخل مساحتك الخاصة، كان متنوع يعني، وبعضهم راح إلى مناطق زي الكمبيوتر الشخصي حقه، يعني هو هذا هو أكثر شيء يعبر عنه. فإذا مثلا تعلق على الاستفتاء أو لديك إضافة أخرى.
It's interesting. يا ريت كنت معكم، عم لاقي صعوبة أتفاعل مع الجمهور، بس إن شاء الله تاني مرة إذا ما حدا عنده أسئلة I think we're fine.
معلش بس كان يقطع.
برجع بعيد.
ايوه
ماشي. عم بقول إذا ما في أسئلة من الجمهور I'm fine. عم لاقي صعوبة أتفاعل لأنه ما عم شوف الجمهور، بس hopefully next time I'll be there.
طيب
بس thank you.
يعني انت اللي شكرا. اضافتك كانت رائعه والمنطقه اللي اضأتها جميله. مشروعك
شكرا، ممنون.
الخان مشروع ممتاز وجميل والله يوفقك فيه، ويعني يستحق منا تحيه كبيره للاستاذ رأفت. شكرا لك يا سيدي.
تسلم، شكرا.